The gentleman's time has expired, and now recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I have a lot of comments here. First of all, the chairman says that over the last 3 decades, things have gotten worse. I'll point out that at least in Wisconsin in the last 3 decades, the age at which children are cared for by the state continually drops. And I'm assuming, half-day 5-year-old kindergarten was the norm 30 years ago. Now it's like, I think 4-year-old is the norm. And I'm sure we have more child care subsidies as well. So if the answer is more early childhood, these test scores of American education would not have been falling for the last 3 decades. Secondly, I'm somewhat stunned that we have 3 experts here talking about what we can do to help children in their early childhood years, and they don't address any of their speaking to the fact that the easiest way to stay out of poverty is to encourage marriage. Instead, they cite the same old programs, which, if anything, discourage marriage, because things like the earned income tax credit, if you're not married, you're going to get more money. I don't think that is a particularly good thing. I think the best thing to do would be to change the culture and go back to the pre-Great Society years, when presumably we had better test scores and we would have better outcomes for the children. Lately, we have politicians standing with groups like Black Lives Matter, and I realize it's a diverse group, but their founders claim they want to get rid of the traditional nuclear family. And I think you should, rather than support that type of thinking, I think you would do a better job of spending some of your time encouraging people to get involved in traditional families. Third, the chairman here talks about the poor moms who are sitting at home and wishing they would go to work. That is not true. I'm looking at the study that you cite, and if you group in things like women who don't have kids at home, many of them want to work, but despite the overwhelming social pressure to answer the questions that I wish I was working, the majority of women with children under age 18 would prefer to be homemakers. They would prefer to stay at home. And that is and that's children under age 18. I wonder what would happen if Gallup included that question for children under age 5. Then I bet it'd be overwhelmingly the women would rather be staying at home. And I will point out that I think whenever you do questioning Gallup or other things, there is a temptation to act politically correctly. I'm sure if you were a mom asked these questions living in, say, a hotbed of intolerance like Berkeley, California, or Madison, Wisconsin, the pressure must be overwhelming to say, I would rather work. But despite the pressure, the societal pressure to say I'd rather be working, the majority of women still say they would rather be at home. Next, if we look at studies on preschool, look at the famous Brookings Institution study, a liberal group. They could find no discernible benefit for Head Start. Now, of course, being a liberal group, I think they felt the answer is to spend more money on Head Start, or things to that degree. But that's interesting. But you can also look at the studies put out by a conservative group like Heritage Foundation that would indicate that early childhood is not a benefit. Next thing I'd point out is that when you increase these early childhood programs, sometimes what you do is you take children away from a family type situation in which they're cared for by the aunt or by the grandparents, and again, ship them to strangers. I don't think there's anything wrong with having children raised by a grandparent or an aunt or something like that, but that is inevitably what will happen as you flood more money into these so-called free child care programs. And I guess my final comment, I in general don't quote communists, but I guess that's it. We'll give back my final 45 seconds to my chairman, but there's some.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time.